Hey, welcome to 12 Tone. I am an academic musician, and I think there's a lot of confusion about what that term means. A lot of people seem to think we're just like normal musicians, but somehow smarter, but in reality, many of us don't play in bands, have albums, or even necessarily write or perform music. Now, normally in a video like this, I'd just start talking about the concept in abstract terms, but this time I can do you one better, because last week I was invited to give a talk at the University of South Carolina's Conference on Public Music Discourse in honor of Leonard Bernstein Centenary. I'll talk a bit about my presentation at the end, but while I was there, I got to ask a bunch of attendees to describe their work in their own words, so without further ado, here's some of the things that academic musicians are actually doing.
My research right now focuses on what I call public music theory. I got interested in this through the composer Arnold Schoenberg. Most of us, if we know about Schoenberg, know about his development of the 12-tone method of composition, but actually Schoenberg was really dedicated about communicating to a general audience about his music. And so through working on him, I started thinking, well, who else has been dedicated to communicating to a general audience? And that took me to Leonard Bernstein, of course, but many, many other people. And that led me to think about media and other venues in ways that we can bring greater musical understanding to as wide of an audience as possible.
I'm working on a couple of projects right now. I'm wrapping up actually one that I've been working on for 15 years on Argentine tango music. And I fell in love with it through the dance, and I started studying the scores. I wanted to make arrangements. How does the music work? I had passion about it. I wanted to bring it out into the world. And so I teach a tango course on the history and culture, and then also the performance practices of the music. And my book, Tracing Tangueros, Argentine Tango Music, just came out, all about the instrumental music. And then I'm working on a new project right now on the intersections of music and yoga, mostly through the lens of Yehudi Menuhin, who was a fantastic child prodigy virtuoso. And he intersected with yoga and brought it into his teaching and into his life practice. So that's my newer project.
I primarily do music cognition, which is sort of a split between music psychology and computational musicology. And I'm really interested in how you can sort of use tools from computational musicology and sort of the frameworks from cognitive psychology to better inform like how people learn melodies. Which like you do, of course, if you're doing like oral skills classes or something like that. It's really important to know what types of mechanisms lead to that, and then how you can actually model that in terms of like building a statistical model of that.
I call my work choreo-musical analysis, analyzing not just the music and phrase lengths and accents in that, but also looking at the choreography and how motions in the choreography interact with what's in music.
Some of my research is on music and baseball, and I've given several talks at the Baseball Hall of Fame and other venues like that. I've talked about Charles Ives music in baseball, and I've also spoken about Take Me Out to the Ball Game and other baseball tunes. More recently, I've done some work on music that's played at the ballpark, such as the music that players select as they walk up to the plate to bat or enter a game to pitch. My work on Charles Ives in baseball turned into a book that was given an award by the Society for American Baseball Research.
So I'm a PhD candidate in music theory at Northwestern University, and my primary research thinks about 19th century evolutionary theories of music. And I'm interested in the ways that the limits and potentials of the human become entwined with basically like the structures of music in these theories. But aside from my primary research, I run a humor Twitter account called @DarkMusicTheory, where I just retweet complaints about music theory. And there are a lot of complaints about music theory, which is what I teach. And I find them really interesting because they seem to index this collective sense of the difficulty, mundaneness, arbitrariness of music theory, whether this is justified or not. And I'm interested in using these tweets to create a kind of like collective catharsis for people who struggle with music theory, and also just to think about what are the reasons why students seem to struggle with music theory.
Hi, so I'm a composer and I'm a scholar of music who studies heavy metal music, and then I also run a nonprofit concert presenting organization that puts on concerts all across Michigan. And I enjoy all three of these streams. They keep me really engaged with thinking about music in interesting ways, creating music in interesting ways, and then sharing it with the people around me.
Alright, so my name is Becky, and I have a YouTube channel teaching post-tonal music theory. So I did my master's at Florida State, and I'm looking to do a PhD in music theory in the future. what I'm really passionate about is history of theory, early music, so the medieval period, the Renaissance period, and also post-tonal 20th century contemporary music, and maybe one day finding the intersection between the two, especially with rhythm and meter and metrical dissonance, things like that. I'm an oboist, so I wrote a paper about this piece called Six Metamorphoses after Ovid that kind of brings in classical mythology sources as well as solo oboe stories from these different mythological figures. And so I like telling stories as well in music and finding different ways of intersecting those things.
The class that I'm currently developing for this semester is a class on music and interdisciplinary studies, where I would be the host professor that teaches the class, and then each week I would bring a guest from the university faculty, and the two of us would team teach a class together for my students in the class, where I would be the music expert, and then one week we would do the linguistics professor, and the two of us would share ideas together and develop lesson plans and work together with our students.
And that's just a small taste of all the awesome presentations at the conference. Some of my favorite talks that I didn't get an interview with included a study on how non-musicians describe music, a look at Marianne Bauer's work as a female composer and musicologist in the early 20th century, a class project where music majors taught post-tonal compositions to retirement home residents, and a discussion of the role of concert programs in understanding the culture of post-war Poland. I also met a couple other music theory channels. You saw Becky Troyer in the interview, who runs Music Theory Studio, a similar hand-drawn channel that explains post-tonal music, and I also met Richard Atkinson, who focuses on analyzing counterpoint. There's links in the description to their channels, as well as Miriam's Twitter account for music theory complaints, Dr. Johnson's book on music and baseball, and Dr. Wendland's book on tango. As for me, my talk had the fancy-sounding title Communicating Music Theory Through Online Video, and it focused on, well, that. I talked about some of the challenges that YouTube educators face, including the lack of a consistent student body, which prevents us from really building curriculums, as well as the difficulty of using important teaching tools like repetition and challenge. I also looked at some of the solutions I used, including developing short, ready-made explanations for common topics and setting my goals to best utilize the tools I do have. Plus, I gave some tips for getting started in the educational video world, like learning from the people who are already doing it well and leading with personality and passion. The talk was streamed live, but unfortunately it's not published online yet. Dr. Jenkins, the conference organizer, is looking into fixing that, and if he does, I'll post a link on Twitter if you want to check it out, so follow me there if you want to see it, or if you just want to see what I look like. I know a lot of you do. Anyway, thanks for watching, and thanks to our Patreon patrons for supporting us and making these videos possible. If you want to help out and get some sweet perks like sneak peeks of upcoming episodes, there's a link to our Patreon on screen now. You can also join our mailing list to find out about new episodes, like, share, comment, subscribe, and above all, keep on rockin'.